Hello, and welcome to the Bloodstream Podcast, a show serving the greater bleeding disorders community, brought to you by Believe Limited and Bloodstream Media, and made possible thanks to our presenting sponsor, Takeda. I am your patient advocate and host, Patrick James Lynch, flying solo today. Amy will be back on the next episode, so that gives me the opportunity to remind you to please speak with a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions. On today's show, we have Paralympian with hemophilia Jack Bridge back for part 2 of his interview with Luke Pembroke as part of the I'm Fine segment, this time featuring a gripping story about a major bleed that he had just 2 days before the games. That is wild, and that segment is made possible by Sanofi. Stick around to hear that. That's coming up after a conversation that I had here in studio with the filmmakers behind What We Wished We Could Be, a film about a UK couple affected by the contaminated blood scandal, facing a difficult, dream-altering decision about the future. Strong representation from Greater England on this one. We have got all that and more on today's episode. Welcome to Bloodstream. And if you like what you hear, please share this episode with your network. You can also share breakout content from today's episode as it is released on Bloodstream Media's social media channels. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Bloodstream Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. The Bloodstream Podcast, that is, I might add, made possible by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Yes, that's right, Takeda. Takeda's got this website, bleedingdisorders.com, where you can learn all about Takeda's commitment to and resources for the bleeding disorders community. Takeda believes in a world free of bleeds. That sounds nice. And they are dedicated more than ever in their efforts to offer a wide range of programs and support to help patients throughout their treatment journey, wherever on that journey they may be. And you can learn more by simply visiting bleedingdisorders.com. One more time for the folks in the back. That's bleedingdisorders.com. And for their founding and ongoing support of the Bloodstream Podcast, I would just like to say thanks, Takeda. Well, listeners, as you can tell from my audio quality and from the video images, for those watching the video version of this episode, I am back in the studio after my extraordinary experience as a survivor of a tornado watch earlier this month. I hung out in a basement for about an hour with courage and sparkling water. It was very daring. And I am particularly grateful to be back in studio today because we have 3 outstanding guests who are going to be joining me here in just a few minutes. The writer, director, and producer of a new film out of the United Kingdom called What We Wished We Could Be. It is a beautiful piece that I had the privilege of watching just yesterday, and ahead of their screening this film at the legendary Chinese Theater in Los Angeles as part of the Holly Shorts Film Festival in just a matter of days, they stopped by our studio. That screening, by the way, will have taken place by the time you're hearing this, so you'll have to head over to Instagram and check out @WhatWeWishedFilm to learn about how that screening went. The latest I'm Fine segment, part 2 with Paralympic swimmer Jack Bridge that I just mentioned, is a great one, and it touches upon resiliency, maturity, self-awareness, some really excellent themes for that mental health-focused podcast segment. So be sure to stick around after the What We Wished conversation to hear from Jack. And in the spirit of stories and films from and about people with hemophilia, if you have been on the National Bleeding Disorder Foundation's website of late, you may have noticed a banner promoting that Jeannie White-Ginder, mother of Ryan White, will be part of the Bleeding Disorders Conference's opening session on August 12th in Atlanta. That is true. And I am excited to share that as part of her appearance, I will also be part of the BDC opening session to set up and share a teaser trailer from Believe Limited's documentary on the life and impact of Ryan White. NBDF CEO Phil Gattone and I have been discussing this since a meeting that we had in Madrid during the World Federation of Hemophilia's World Congress this spring, and now it's officially happening. So for those attending the conference, be sure you do not miss the opening session so that you can get an exclusive look at the teaser trailer for this powerful documentary and hear from one of the most impactful and impressive speakers that the hemophilia community has to offer. For those of you who have not yet registered to attend, visit bleeding.org and follow links to the Bleeding Disorders Conference's registration page. This one is not one to miss. Longtime listeners know that Believe Limited has been working on this documentary for a long time, and this will be the first time we're sharing this teaser trailer. I look forward to seeing everyone there. All right, lastly, before we get to our filmmakers, I recently posted something on social media about the need to continue striving toward a cure for hemophilia. In that, I did give out some flowers to the researchers and companies who have made it possible for some of these newer or novel therapies to come out, many of which that are life-changing for some patients. One of those companies is Pfizer, who supports the Bloodstream podcast through advertising, and this next ad is brought to you by Pfizer. Did you know Pfizer has been supporting the rare disease community for over 25 years? And as part of their commitment, Pfizer continues to unlock the potential of new therapies. Recently, FDA approved Becvez, or phytonecogene elaparvovec DZKT, a suspension for intravenous infusion, is now available. If you are curious about learning more and whether Becvez is right for you, talk to your doctor. Have questions? Get connected with a live individual, one-on-one, at 1-855-4-BECVEZ or 1-855-423-7839 from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday to Friday. Or you can sign up at becvez.com, BEQVEZ.com, to receive emailed information that can help you learn more. Discover how Pfizer is changing the treatment landscape. Please visit www.becvez.com. Now, let's meet and hear from the team behind the new film, What We Wished We Could Be. Bloodstream listeners, I am now joined by the team behind What We Wished We Could Be, a new short film profiling a story of someone impacted by the blood contamination crisis in the United Kingdom. I'll let the filmmakers talk more about the story itself, but let's do a quick whip around. Luke, we'll start with you, and if you could just, for the audience, state your name, your role on the film, and we'll go from there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. I'm Luke Shelley, the director of the film, and yeah, it's a privilege, real privilege.
I'm Jenna-Louise Hawkins, I'm the writer, and thank you very much for having us.
And I'm Sophie Stacy, and I'm the producer. And yes, thank you so much for having us.
Well, it's great to meet you each, Sophie, Jenna, and Luke. We don't often have 4 people in this studio either, so it's a nice opportunity to cram in the studio, cram in the equipment. So what we wished we could be, which I have to admit, when we first started going back and forth about this and why you're in the States, which we'll talk about here in a moment, I didn't realize that it was a scripted narrative film, and I thought it was a short documentary. So it was, even when I saw writer, I was still in documentary. I'm in a documentary headspace. So it was a nice treat when I got the screener, like, oh, this is not a documentary. The opening scene, I was like, oh, that's an artistic way to open the documentary in the bathroom. That's cool. Oh, this isn't wait, did he just start bleeding? Or how did this? And so I had to kind of catch up to it, which was kind of a fun way to experience the film. But I'd love for you to just set the table for the audience. So what is What We Wished We Could Be? And Jenna, maybe we'll start that question with you.
So What We Wish We Could Be is, as you say, a narrative film about what it looks and feels like to live with the consequences of the contaminated blood scandal. We didn't want to do a piece with a kind of political, broad, high-level look into the subject. We wanted to take it right into the home, what it feels like, the dynamics that a couple who are navigating that just have to automatically handle.
And what inspired you to write this and work with these two fine folks on bringing it to life?
Well, the first thing I would say is, I suppose what underpins all of this is I am one of the people affected by the blood scandal, in that my husband, he suffers with Hemophilia B, He received infected blood in, God, I think it was the early 1980s. And so we've just been on that journey. And in terms of telling the story, when I started my screenwriting journey, it never really occurred to me that I would tell a story about the blood scandal, because I think when something is your lived experience, you don't necessarily view it as exceptional or a story worthy of telling. It's just your norm.
Sure.
And when we went into lockdown, we had this huge global phenomena of people not being able to touch one another. And this was really, really challenging. But for me, I'd already been there. I was like, this is fine. And the reason I'd already been there was because when my husband was going through interferon and ribavirin treatment for his hepatitis C, it made him really, really uncomfortable physically, and he just couldn't bear to be touched. So back in sort of 2008, we're talking about, I learned to live without touching my husband and without being touched by him. So when lockdown happened and everyone was realising the importance of that skin hunger, I was like, I've got this. So it actually inspired me to sit down and write a script, which I shared, and those who read the script then asked some probing questions about how I was able to write with sort of such immediacy on that subject. And that then led to someone saying to me, well, why don't we tell a story about the blood scandal? And then the rest led on to meeting these fine people.
Well, that was Touch, which is a script that Jenna wrote, which is the script that I read. And really kind of, as Jenna said, kind of provoked the idea of telling the story of the contaminated blood scandal in a way, in a sort of grassroots level way, about a couple, and not try and tackle the subject, as Jenna says, as a kind of political statement, and more about that real intimate kind of situation where we don't see the effects of the contaminated blood scandal from a perspective of just regular people living their lives. And I found that really interesting. When I read Touch, I knew that it was a personal story because Jenna did set it up as that, but I felt like we could really push it, and we could really kind of sort of tell Jenna's story in a way that could really inform people about the contaminated blood scandal. Because for me, I knew hardly anything about it when I first met Jenna, and I think that was really the main reason that I felt that this needed to be told, because I didn't even know about it, and I felt like it really was a story that needed to spread across the UK specifically, but also globally, and it has had a global reach of it already, and it's unbelievable. But I think there's so much room for more people to know about it.
Definitely. And Sophie, was Touch the first piece that you read as well, or where did you come into the process?
I came in a little bit later, actually. Luke and Jenna were working together probably for a good 6 months before I came in. And I think that was really important, actually, that they created this really safe space, because the script was very, very different. I know there was Touch, there were sort of different iterations of it. But I think the two of them working together, that Luke especially created a really safe space for Jenna to be able to tell her story as the film is now. So I kind of let them do their thing, work away on it for 6 months, and then they presented this script, which is quite close actually to our final script. And that must have been about December time, 2022, I think.
And as a producer, had you ever worked on anything that related to hemophilia, contaminated blood, or anything like that before?
No. I mean, this is much of a learning journey for me as it was for Luke, actually. And I the same as Luke, I think it was really important to be on that journey and make sure that the story was told and it spread as far as it possibly could. Yeah.
Luke, what brings the three of you now to Los Angeles and to the United States? What's going on right now with the film?
Well, excitingly, we wrapped up post-production and finished the film about 2 months ago, and we got the news that we were going to be premiering both in Rhode Island International Film Festival and Holly Shorts here in LA, which is a huge, crazy thing to happen to this very small film about this very, very UK-based film. to play in some of the biggest festivals in the US, you know. I mean, just arriving here in LA and going to Holly Shorts and collecting our filmmaker passes and kind of getting absorbed into that world. It's kind of really kind of bizarre that we're able to share this very intimate personal story with such a global audience. And we're incredibly honored and excited about it.
And at the time we're recording this, both of those festival appearances have yet to happen. Is that correct?
So we've been to Rhode Island, and it's world premiere in Rhode Island, and we are yet to have our screening at Holly Shorts.
And Jenna, maybe I'll start with this question with you. What was the reception like at the Rhode Island International Film Festival?
It was really great. It was lovely to... Luke went up afterwards for a filmmaker Q&A, and the first question that came from the audience... there's a whole row of filmmakers who screened as part of that segment. And the first question was someone put their hand up and said, I was really struck by the Tainted Blood film. My cousin was a haemophiliac who was affected, and he had tragically died of AIDS at the age of, in his 30s, I think. So for that to be the first question and it was followed up with a question which Luke answered very eloquently. But it just shows how many people globally have touched this tragedy, and how underrepresented it is on screen. I don't recall seeing a film about the blood scandal before. I don't think that there's a huge amount of representation of haemophilia on screen as well. So it was just really positive and affirming to have that question and that reception.
And interesting how the how the COVID pandemic kind of gave a new contextualization to HIV and AIDS and the contamination. Obviously, we also have the blood inquiry in the UK, which is recently wrapped up, and we've had some people come through Bloodstream to talk about that as well. So a lot of timeliness with when this film came out. How did the story, you touched on this a little bit, actually both Luke and Sophie touched on this, but how did the story and the project evolve through the development, production, and post-production process? Because with a short film, you've got a limited runtime to try to tell the story that you want to tell. So I'm curious to know any of the highlights of how things evolved through the process.
Certainly. I think just going back to developing the script with Jenna, when I came on board to help guide the story and kind of extract what I could from Jenna and be able to tell her story authentically. We really we had a sort of this kind of two roads to go down in terms of moments in their life to sort of depict in the short film. One was when Jenna first was sort of told about Sean's condition and what that meant for their relationship.
Sean being your husband.
Sean being her husband. And the second was when treatment was presented to Sean and what that meant for the relationship going forward. So this is obviously 3, 4, 5 years after you first were told about his haemophilia. Was that right, Jen? Just to get my facts straight.
Well, it was a bit more. It was less dramatic than appears in the film. Obviously, we had to, for the purposes of narrative interest, to tell the story as it exactly happened. Wouldn't be that interesting, so we had to weave in the conflict and give it some drama. But actually what really happened is very early in our relationship, Sean and I went to one of his consultations, and they tabled the idea of treatment then. I think we're talking about 2004, 2005 at this point. But then there was a good few years of waiting on the waiting list, being the most severe patients were escalated, so it was just a waiting game for a long time.
And it's those conversations, talking about these big moments in and obviously, as Jenna said, obviously we evoked the drama, but there still were big moments and life-changing moments for both of them, and it was just how we figure out telling both those narratives, and the idea of doing a dual timeline. So in the film, we take the approach where we run 2 parallel timelines during the couple's life, which kind of mirror each other strangely, and I think that's why we felt like it worked, because we were able to cover the full kind of a big scope of their life in a very short amount of time, because as you say, short films, you don't have a lot of time to tell stories, so you have to be really clever with how you give information to the audience. And I think that dual timeline gave us the opportunity to really see them in their most sort of innocent, but then also flash forward a few years to really see them in a relationship dealing with the direct repercussions of having to take this really, really intense treatment.
Yeah.
I appreciate how much you're referring to the two of them, because that's something that came across very clearly to me in watching the film, is just how much it impacts not just the person with, but their partner, their caregiver, their life partner. And I thought that was really beautifully balanced. The role of music plays an interesting role in this story and in how the story is told. I don't know how much about it you want to say specifically, but I would just love to hear the inspiration behind the use of music in the story.
Well, it started with the subject of voice and expression of voice. And one of the things that struck me about the blood scandal was the extent to which the voice of the community was repressed, in that the political narrative around it was such that it sort of said it was to expose haemophiliacs to the risk of contamination with these terrible viruses was an acceptable risk. And there was, politicians were using phrases like, it's incredibly bad luck. And it just undermines, people were feeling like they had their bodies, their lives taken from them. And yet they were being told, yeah, but that was, an acceptable risk to take. So sorry it happened, but, the benefit is you didn't bleed to death. So it's this, so it started with voice, and I thought about, what Aidan's voice would be. What would he say? What does he want to express to the world, but can't? So that kind of led to the idea that he's a very talented singer, and that he doesn't have the confidence and he doesn't have the permission. He doesn't feel safe to share his voice with the world. So that's where it started.
And I guess just leading on from Jenna's point, I think also him being a singer and having that musical element to the story, it allows the character to not be defined by his medical conditions, because I think that's really important. That's a big thing for our film, is that it's not just about, the whole scandal, everything that's been reported on in the UK. It's statistics, numbers, how many people have died, how many people were infected. And I think the point of our short is to really put a face to those statistics, and that these are real people with real ambitions, with real passions, that a lot of the time across the community, people had passions and careers and aspirations that they just couldn't achieve because they were infected. So I think that was a real big part of why we decided to have this musical element, because I think it also allows us to communicate that kind of the emotion of the story in a really kind of distinct way as well.
Yeah, I think just touching on that, music has been part of the full film's journey. For the original song anyway, that was being developed as the script was being developed, so it's always been part of the full journey, and we're very lucky to have people that we've worked with before who have come on board and written a song for us, as well as obviously later on having our actor perform it as well. But everyone's been so responsive and wanting to be on this journey with us. Even they're the same as myself and Luke, not really knowing much, but as soon as they've heard about it, they just wanted to be part of this team and this journey.
We'll be right back with more from the What We Wished We Could Be film team right after this.
This next segment is brought to you by Genentech. Being a caregiver of someone with hemophilia can be hard, but know that you are not alone. Genentech has several resources for navigating hemophilia, including stories from other members in the community. In the words of Miranda, a mother of twin boys with hemophilia, since connecting with other hemophilia families and educating ourselves had been so helpful, we made a point of getting involved with the larger community and attended conferences whenever we could. To hear more about Miranda and others in the hemophilia community, please visit www.caregiversupport.org. filmmakers.com.
I want to ask another question about the music because it plays such an important role. It's a beautiful piece. Can you talk a little bit about the production of the music itself and how that came to be?
Absolutely. So we were very incredibly lucky with the music for What We Wished because it needed to have, because obviously we shot on film, so we needed to have like a real tangibleness to the music too. So our wonderful composer, Michael Llewellyn-Barker, who opted to take the score and record it with a 40-piece string orchestra, which is insane because in short films you don't do that because
it's a two-person film with a 40-person orchestra.
You know, it's an insane thing. But I think it really was important to him to deliver a score that really elevated the piece and really emotively kind of paralleled what the couple were going through. When we were there, just sitting in the booth listening to the score being recorded live, I don't think I'll ever have a moment as amazing, as emotional as that. I think these guys can agree with me on that one.
Yeah, burst into tears as soon as the first chord rang through the booth.
Yeah. To quote Michael, he said, "It's a human story and it requires human music." That was his selling point, and we were
sold.
We were sold.
Can't argue with that.
No.
And now in a few days' time, you get to hear it played at the Chinese Theater in Los Angeles.
That is also another pinch me moment.
You mentioned Aiden, that's the protagonist in the story, and his partner's name is?
Charlotte.
Yeah. Can you share a little about the casting process? How did you come to work with the actors that play Aiden and Charlotte?
Yeah, I mean, just taking a step back, we were very lucky to have this script optioned by Slick Films back in January 2023. And with that comes an amazing team, including a casting director that I've worked with previously called Stevie Davis. He is incredible. And we just shared the script with him and he sent us 1,000,001 people who could be perfect for the role. But it was quite tricky, I think, to find our Aiden, especially because there's so many elements to him. You know, there has to be a really powerful performance on screen and then also a great singing voice as well. So it was quite a tough ask, but Stevie was incredible and I think really supported us through that journey. So we kind of went back and forth on who to cast first, actually. I think we were a little bit of, do we find our Charlotte first? Do we find our Aiden first? And I think we started looking at our Charlottes and then that kind of defined who Aiden was a bit more. Because Aiden really could have been anyone, any age. So I think finding our Charlotte helped us to kind of put a face to the character. And I mean, we saw Jamie and that was it, Jamie Moscato. I think we just saw some clips of him. Our casting director was like, he's amazing. And he sent the script and I think a day later he said, I want to do it. And that was how we got our Aiden. It was incredible, wasn't it?
And that was swiftly followed by approaching Anushka Lucas, who plays Charlotte. Her response to the script was immediate and she wanted to be involved. And I think the challenge that was presented by the script, because it is a very intense two-hander and it requires a lot from our actors, I think, especially when on the script it's like have a enormous breakdown in a car. I think it's
not intimidating at all.
Intimidating at all, you know. So I really feel like it was something that they both felt that they could take on and it would challenge them as actors. And I think they did that. And I think what worked about that casting of Jamie and Anushka is that they both come from the West End in the UK. So they're prolific theatre actors. And what that allowed us to do was we were shooting on film, so that's a kind of a segue, but shooting on film means that you don't have endless takes, so you need to be able to hit the marks of the performance and have that nuance every time with, you know, very little kind of, you know, room for error. And that really allowed, I think, the theatre training really helped with that, because obviously, you know, they go on stage every night and they have to just give it their all, and I think that really played it well for us.
That makes a lot of sense. What led to the decision to shoot on film?
Well, this is a big question, and I best not mess it up because our DP is in the studio. Well, in the area of which we're recording. He's over there. He's filming us.
Now, is that on film?
That's on film. That's not on film.
Oh, that's on iPhone. Okay, different.
Yes, we shot the film on 16mm, and I think that was a discussion that me and Yannick both felt really kind of connected with the story, because there's a tangible nature to film. There's a kind of a physical, kind of realistic kind of feel to it.
Luke and Yannick, our DP, they came to me very early on and said, we really want to shoot this on 16mm film. And I said, absolutely not. Just, for the pure reason of looking at a budget for a short film here and thinking, oh my God, how do we do this?
I don't know, I just felt like this story needed to feel real and tangible, and like almost you can go and touch it, and these characters feel like, they lived in that moment. And I hope that was what you got when you watched the film, and what people do get from it.
Yeah, I think it was a really strong choice, though I do appreciate, as a producer, the initial hearing of it being kind of scary.
Very scary. I think mostly because we hadn't done it before as well. They went out, they bought a roll of film and they did a test with we had a version of the track. So they did sort of a temp music video. And as soon as it came back, it was just gorgeous. And I said, okay, let's do it then.
So to keep talking about production for a moment, were there any moments of challenge or setback, or, I mean, there always are, right? Are there any that stand out as particularly notable?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you try to block them from your mind just so you can actually do the next project. Otherwise, I don't think you'd ever do a project again with with everything that happens. I think something we kind of have always spoken about is so Anushka's casting actually was quite last minute. We did have someone else in the role, and they were unwell and had to drop out the week before. So it was actually very, very fitting. It worked in our favour massively. We were very, very lucky. But Anushka was always on our radar, and then we were a week out from shooting, and Stevie just sent her the script, and she was like, absolutely, I'll do it. But it worked really well because Jamie was very, very well researched. As soon as he jumped on board the project, he was reading books, he was listening to podcasts, which he said ruined his holiday. But then Anushka came on, and I think she had 2 days of prep, which made it perfect because obviously Charlotte, as a character, she's coming in, she doesn't actually know anything. So it did lend itself very, very well. And we threw her in the deep end. We did the car scene on her first day. That was her first scene.
Wow.
Yeah. So we threw them in, and Jamie's singing was the first day for him as well. So we pushed ourselves in terms of production, but in terms of the actual shoot, it was magical, actually. I think shooting on film gives a real sense of, I don't know, perfectionism and this sense of urgency that you don't necessarily get with digital, because there's always that one more take.
Yeah, there's like a focus on set, I think, you get when everyone knows that you're shooting film, so they understand that we don't have endless resources to keep going and shooting again. So when we're going for a take, you could hear a pin drop, and I know that's the case when you shoot digital, but there's just this intensity. It's like an energy in the room, and it's probably one of the best set experiences I've ever had. And unfortunately for Sophie, probably one I would like to have again. So whether I want to go back to digital or not is a question that I'm sure Yannick, our DP, would agree that we'd like to keep doing it.
Well, there's something, obviously stakes and a sense of urgency ought to be a part of any story that you're telling, right? But there is something about this particular story where the stakes and the urgency to act, to do something, the lack of action, there just are a number of thematic tie-ins that feel like it was a great story to take the plunge and decide, you know what, this is a story worth trying to shoot on film because it will add to some fundamental part of the story itself. Like, not knowing that watching it, but as you're talking about it, and the casting, that little insight is tremendous because Aiden did feel really lived in his experience, and Charlotte had questions and was a bit on the outside and wasn't a part of all decision making, and it's neat to know that behind the scenes there was some organic reason why it may have felt, aside from them being excellent actors, but there were some circumstantial reasons that may have just amplified what was happening with their work.
Absolutely. And I think as well, Jamie, I mean, we were very, very lucky actually to have Sean on set with us for a few days, especially when we were doing the bits with the injections. He was our consultant, and just I think he was generally in awe of seeing it all happen. But you could see Jamie in the corner just watching Sean, and just tiny little mannerisms, I think, snuck in ever so slightly to his performance.
That's so neat. What was that experience like for you and Sean to be on set and watching this play out? And I'm curious in general, too. Obviously, you made a choice to dive into this creatively and put a lot of your time, energy, and focus there. What has his journey been like leading up to these moments where he's on set?
I think for him, he found it really surprising. Like he's not been on film sets before. It was all new to him, and Sean is a very reserved person. So he had a certain amount of reluctance about being on set. He's like, "Do you need me really?" And I said yes, and that sort of became apparent very, very quickly of how much we did need him, because there was a learning curve for production design and makeup effects. Thinking about the nosebleed scene, the makeup artist who did the tissues and the effect of the blood was very used to doing that kind of work, but had never done it for a character with haemophilia before. So we were watching on a monitor, and I could feel Sean growing tense, and I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "There's not enough blood on the tissues." He said, when I've had those nosebleeds, it's just not so. Quickly went to Luke and said, "Sean has a note."
Don't you love getting notes from all left, right, and center?
Notes from all round. I love it.
And after that, you could see him sort of growing a bit straighter in his chair, feeling a bit more empowered. And I think it was really great for him and Jamie to spend some time together and to talk, and for Sean to feel like his experience mattered and was being listened to. And Jamie was very attentive, and he asked him questions, and he was able to share little anecdotes, stuff that's not on the film, not in the story, but I could see Jamie internalizing it and sort of building it into Aidan's history.
That's very cool. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that about the tissues, because I did feel like the blood and the way that the nosebleed was depicted was accurate. Like it just, as someone with hemophilia watching it, was like, oh, that feels good.
Yeah.
Like that's, again, I was still in the like, wait, is this a scripted film or a documentary? So that's a good sign.
There was lots of discussion, how much blood is enough blood, and we, having the conversation around, this is not an average nosebleed. This is a nosebleed that's not clotting, and it's, so everyone was learning together. So having Sean there was so good for the film, but also so good for him and so good for me as well, because I got to share the experience with him as well. And my other work, I've not had the honour of having him there on set in the same capacity, so that was lovely.
And have you been able to share this with any other members of the UK haemophilia community? Have you gotten any other feedback or input from community members thus far?
We were absolutely privileged and honoured to have some members of the contaminated blood and bleeding disorder community attend. We had a private screening in London, and their response was everything. Having their approval and their enthusiasm in response to the film, and to see them responding and recognising their own experience on screen and seeing tears in their eyes, that just was the most phenomenal experience. And we have an opportunity, I believe, to share the film with the Hemophilia Society in the UK. I might throw this back to the producer.
Yeah, I mean, when we made this film, we were very keen that it wasn't just a normal film that was going to just do the festival run, and we wanted it to be something that could be used by the community. So we're having lots of conversations about the film being used by charities for screenings, for training, just to get people to actually be aware of not just the scandal, but, you know, people still exist with haemophilia, and it's really important that you know, this doesn't happen again.
And it also makes the case that stories like this are worthy of being told in a narrative format too. You know, comment was made earlier about the lack of representation. You know, I've certainly heard over the years, hemophilia, it's a small population, how relatable. But I think your film is such a testament to, well, storytelling at its best is always specific. But great storytelling, when specific, reaches a much broader audience. So yes, this is hemophilia and contaminated blood, but it's also a couple just trying to figure things out, right? Who are just trying to deal with the complexities that all couples have complexities. This is theirs. So, you know, as a community member, I appreciate that there's now a great narrative piece that will be out into the world that can be pointed to as like, this is somewhere that you can go to learn a little bit more about, you know, what this community has experienced. So curious to know a little bit more about the broader plan for distribution of the film. So you're here in the States for a week, had the premiere in Rhode Island, now here in Los Angeles. You were just talking, Sophie, about discussions with charities and organizations for screenings coming up. What else? What's the plan beyond the next several weeks? And eventually, where do you hope people will be able to see the film, broadly speaking?
Well, we're just jumping back. The film is produced by Slick Films, which is a great independent film production company in the UK, and they create some of the most sort of thought-provoking, kind of forward-thinking films, short films that I think the UK has to offer, and in terms of films that spark change and talk about underrepresented stories, and I think they're as a hub for us, they've been amazingly supportive in getting us to this point already. And I think they've got a huge amount of connections in the sense of us being able to put this out there into the world. There's hopefully going to be talks with some distribution that are sort of closely linked to Slick that we hope to get. And I think that will be informed by how our festival journey goes, because I think you need to, within that world, you need to collect those laurels and collect that acclaim to then find the market in which it can then be shared online. But I think that a lot of the festivals nowadays do have offerings of online platforms for people to see the films sooner rather than later. So, for example, Holly Shorts, you can watch that when it goes live. They release it online for a certain amount of time so people can see it online. And we've also been selected to Aesthetica Film Festival in the UK, which is very exciting. It's a BAFTA qualifying festival, so we're really thrilled about that. And they do have an online platform for all of their shorts, so the community can go online and watch it there as well. So there will be loads of those kind of things as we go along the process, and then hopefully we can get, with short films it's very difficult because they're not theatrically viable, so you have to find other ways, but ultimately we just want as many people to see it as possible.
Of course. Where can people go to keep up with opportunities to see it as part of the online component of a festival or elsewhere? Website, social media, where can people go?
You can go on the Slick Films website, have a page on there, and it will have our press release on there, and people can kind of watch the trailer and catch up with us on there.
We're on Instagram, and it's at What We Wished Film, so that's What We Wished Film, and yeah, all of our news will be there. I'm sure we'll be sharing our time here as well on the page, and that's what updates will be, and I hope that people can touch in, and also I think we're also actively sharing the content, and Jenna is helping us with that, with the community, with the various Facebook groups of the Tainted Blood community, and they're getting updates as well. But publicly, the Instagram page is probably the best bet.
Fantastic. And we'll have a link to that in the program notes as well. So as we start to wind to a close, and Sophie, maybe I'll start with you on this one, and we'll whip around this way. You've each kind of touched on this already, but just to put a fine point on it, what impact do you hope this film will have on the audiences that it reaches? And maybe as a related part of that question, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to have the opportunity to speak to before we're done?
I think something I've always felt I wanted audiences to walk away from this film with is although it's not very positive, it is a sense of anger. And because something like this has gone untouched for so long, and it takes us 40 years to finally get a short film about it, let alone, obviously, the UK inquiry only just coming out. So I think that's always what I've wanted people to feel. And I think it's a very powerful emotion. And in the UK, we've seen a lot of change come through that. With the post office scandal, there was a drama about it. And that provoked a lot of change. And a lot of hearings came about from it, and people rightfully being stripped of their honours because of it. So I've always wanted people to have that because it's such a powerful emotion. And I think the story of Aidan and Charlotte and giving a real human element to such a preventable event was so important to us. But yeah, I think I'm always the one who sort of has the more of the negative emotion about it. These two are very, very positive people, but I felt that is the power that can hopefully help to bring more change. I think there's still a long road, even though we've had the inquiry. There's still a long road to go. There's still a lot of stuff that needs to happen, and it will never really probably be enough. But if we can help in any way, that's what this film is really about.
Well, thanks for saying that. I think there are a lot of people who would appreciate your speaking to the anger and, not hiding that just because it may not be the most pleasant of responses. I think that's a very, it aligns with lived experiences of people who, to your point, for decades have lived with anger over what happened. So thanks for giving voice to that.
Yes.
Jenna, what about for you?
For me, it's about relatability. When we see the blood scandal being reported on the news in the UK, it's always given with a sense of distance. It's reported numbers, data, statistics. In the UK, the numbers that get thrown around is 4,689 haemophilia patients, 3,000 people who've died, 30,000 potential infections beyond the haemophilia community. And those are bewildering figures. But they enable people to sit back and say, well, that's not me. And for me, the contaminated blood scandal is not a number. It's a person, and it's the person I love. And if one audience member can look at the film and see Aidan and Charlotte and relate to them and identify with them and feel compassion for them, then I would view that as a huge success.
Wow.
Hear, hear. Nothing more to say on that. That was perfect.
I mean, I don't know how I'm going to follow Jenna's
good luck, Luke. Sorry about the order there.
But for me, as a person who's not been affected by the contaminated blood scandal or having any bleeding disorders, I think I had the responsibility to tell a story that would relate to everybody and bring people into this world and let everyone know that, the people that Jenna references to looking at the news and saying that's not me, it's my job to make sure that they see this film and go, this could be you, and this is something that you need to know about, and that we need to have as many people talking about this as possible so this can never happen again, and that so people are more aware about what haemophilia is, what this blood scandal is and what it is about, and hopefully the education element for me is so important.
Well, Luke, Shelley, director, Jenna-Louise Hawkins, writer, Sophie Stacy, producer, here on behalf of What We Wished We Could Be, a Slick Films film. Thank you so much for coming through to Bloodstream to talk about this. And again, on a personal note, as someone with hemophilia, a special thanks to you, Luke, and you, Sophie, as people not a part of the community that Jenna and I belong to, giving so much of yourselves to bring the story to life, to make it relatable to others so that they can connect with something that isn't statistics, it's people's lives. So thank you, and best of luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. It's a real honor.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna, Sophie, and Luke, for that excellent conversation about your beautiful film. Again, listeners, you can keep up with the film on Instagram at What We Wished Film for updates about their festival appearances, any patient advocacy group or charity screenings, and greater distribution. All right, segueing now into our I'm Fine segment. This is part 2 of Luke's conversation, Luke Pembroke. We got 2 Lukes on this episode. Not often we have 2 Lukes, but Luke Pembroke spoke with Paralympic swimmer Jack Bridge in this 2-part conversation as part of I'm Fine. Part 2 is coming up right now with some revelatory shares from Jack. I'm Fine aims to challenge entrenched ideas around chronic resiliency and satisfaction with suboptimal outcomes by inspiring people with hemophilia to seek education and truly consider the possibilities. Sanofi seeks to expand the idea of what's possible for the hemophilia community, and you can take a deeper look at the science behind hemophilia and an important connection between factor activity levels and potential activities at levelsmatter.com. And now, on to I'm Fine.
This is all I've ever known. Is that even
possible for me?
I don't want to miss anything.
I don't need that. I don't want to acknowledge my pain.
I don't want to get poked with needles.
I don't want that.
There's nothing wrong.
I'm fine.
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 Now, when you describe just how much work and training went into it to get to that point, like, that is a lot. And even when you were having issues with your hemophilia, you don't talk about like taking a day off. You talk about what you could do alternatively to make sure that you're keeping up with the training. Are there any sort of particular moments that like stand out to you, whether like hemophilia related or not, where you just sort of think, wow, like I was really pushing myself to the limit and having to just kind of put the physical and mental strain to a side to just push through? Are there any sort of moments that really stand out to you that, you know, people perhaps don't really recognize goes into it?
There was one particular moment 2 days before. So this is probably the 5th or 6th of September, obviously the week of the game. So the games had started on the 28th of August or whatever it was. On the 5th of September, I had a massive hemorrhagosis in my left knee, like huge. I had a massive, massive bleed 2 days before my main event. So that could have jeopardized that kind of 300-day period of working towards this day, having this day kind of highlighted in my calendar. So I had the massive bleed, kind of did all my treatment as usual. The bleed wasn't going away. So I was rushed to kind of a private hospital in the Olympic Village, and my knee was aspirated. For those that don't know what that is, it's basically they stick a needle into your joint and drain all the blood, which isn't, standard practice. And I would just kind of put my faith in the doctors that were around me in my support network to make sure that I would have the best opportunity of being ready for the 8th. So by the time I came around to the 8th, I had already done kind of a full day of training. I was back in feeling great. And luckily enough, it didn't kind of hinder anything in my performance, and I was able to still go out and smash it. But it was kind of, you had to reset your mental aspect and kind of your preparation to not panic, because that's when there's like a drop off in performance. So for that to take place, and for me just to go through the whole process of, having to being rushed in, being aspirated and trying to recover in that period of time, and then get ready for the emotion that I was going to feel in front of a crowd of 17,500 people chanting my name. As an 18-year-old, it's a lot to handle. But I think, again, it comes back to that support network, and I kind of lent quite heavily on my coaches. My family had no idea, because that would have not that they wouldn't have been caring and loving it, but it would have just stressed me out. So it's just recognizing what was good for me at that point in time, what wasn't good for me, and just making sure that I was able to perform at the top level.
Wow, that is during the games. I didn't know about that one.
No one. It's not a story I've ever told. Not many people know.
Well, exclusive here. I'm blown away, man, to have that happen so soon before you were due to be competing on that stage. I mean, that is crazy. I mean, I've heard the stories of you talking about the training where you're sat on the edge of the pool and you're throwing up and all of that horrible stuff. But I mean, that probably pales in contrast to having to have your knee aspirated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was, and don't get me wrong, there was days like that where there was weeks where I would go, doing like 10,000 10,000 meters a week, 100,000 meter weeks. I'd be in the pool for 2.5 hours, just going up and down, literally nonstop for 2.5 hours. There'd be times where we'd be doing, fast sprinting and then doing just trying to produce as much, lactic acid as much, and you'd just be in a world of doom. But that kind of already kind of set you up for whatever you were feeling in the race. You just knew you could handle, and that's what that kind of 300-day period was for. But then to kind of circle back and come back to that week beforehand, that was the biggest challenge I think I'd had mentally, physically, and kind of relating it back to my haemophilia. It was just a pretty awful, I'd say 6-hour period, but I just put my faith in the people that were around me that were there to look after me, and they did a really good job.
I mean, that is another level of pushing through and kind of having to adopt that I'm fine mentality. And I think you touched on an important thing there when you mentioned not wanting to tell your family. Obviously you don't want to worry them, and you know that they'd be supportive, but sometimes when it comes to having a condition like haemophilia, you have people that care about you so much that actually when you tell them everything, it can kind of backfire and cause you more stress in a weird way. And it seems selfish, but I think it's such an important thing to recognize that ultimately you've got your support network, but the condition lands with you. And sometimes you just need to kind of own it yourself and work through things. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that as well. We always hear about, seek support from those around you and, share. But now and again, I think it's okay to kind of take a beat, reflect on yourself, and then see who within that circle is the most appropriate to speak to.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think I don't want to speak for anyone else that has the condition, but I've certainly found that with the condition, I had to mature at quite an early age and had to be aware of what was going on with my body at quite an early age. So that kind of left me in good stead. And it's still the same now. If there's no need to worry anybody, there's no need to worry about it. And you can just I ring up my physio or ring up my doctor and have a chat with them and see what their advice would be for if I was going through a certain issue. Touch wood, my condition's kind of really well managed currently. And I don't really have that many issues. It's just, but if I were to have issues, I have that faith and trust in my support network that they're able to help me out in any kind of sticky situation. But it comes back to just being self-aware and having to be self-aware at such a young age, because you have to do a lot of growing up quite quickly when you have a blood condition like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's so important for people to recognize, that it is a big ask. There's things that you have to adapt and get used to from a young age with haemophilia. But I think for people listening in to hear that from someone like yourself is super important. And that sort of leads me on to what I wanted to touch upon next, in terms of your position in the community over the years. So you've always sort of been front and center, and as someone who's done a fair bit of advocacy myself, I am acutely aware of how draining that can be at times, and sometimes forgetting to maybe check in on how you're doing yourself. During all of that and over the sort of past decade or so, did there ever come a point where you felt like you needed to step back a bit and focus more on yourself? And how did you sort of get to that point, if that was the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the period after the games were quite difficult. So the year after the games, I was, still being, was really successful, broke a couple more British records along the way. But then kind of 4 weeks before World Championships, had another massive hemophilia. And this time it wasn't as simple as getting it aspirated. I had to be in hospital for a week to get that sorted. That kind of ruined my prep for the World Championships. I then was going through my A-levels, was in various kind of personal relationships at the time, then moved up to Newcastle, managed to qualify for the European team, came away with a silver medal, but had chickenpox 5 days before the championship started. And I wasn't swimming as fast as I was in 2013. So constantly felt like I was chasing my tail, as well as going through a massive personal shift in terms of moving my whole life from Preston, in the northwest of England, up to the northeast in Newcastle, where I trained and lived and studied for my university degree. I then had some surgery in 2015 on my ankle, which was kind of giving me a lot of stress at the time. So took a year out in 2015, missed the major championships, which were in Glasgow, And then all of a sudden we were back into kind of Paralympic here in 2016 and kind of trained myself into the ground. My mental health was on the floor. And then I ended up missing the team by less than half a second. So to go through all that and then miss the team by less than half a second kind of took a massive toll on my mental health. And I just decided to step away from swimming for a period of time. And again, at that period of time, I was going through a hell of a lot in terms of pain management with my bad joints in my left knee and my right ankle specifically. I was going through a hell of a lot with those. And I just decided I needed to take an extended break from swimming. So missed the Rio Games and kind of didn't get back into the swimming pool until mid of 2018, once I'd kind of figured out what I wanted to do. And I was going into my last year of uni, and I just wanted to kind of feel that elation of standing up in front of, a crowd and an international competition. And unfortunately, during that period of time, that my osteoarthritis in my left knee had developed so much that I couldn't do breaststroke anymore. So although I couldn't do breaststroke, I still entered this international competition in 2018. And sorry, just to rewind, I'd been invited to go and speak. I joined a program called Inspired Through Sport, which aimed to inspire children and school kids, as well as some businesses, into athletes who had been to previous Olympic and Paralympic Games to go and talk about their kind of lived journey, which was great. It gave me a little bit of pocket money to spend whilst I was at university, but also gave me a really good education in public speaking and kind of putting on full day events for school kids. And I started that before I decided to get back into the swimming pool. And my story kind of had it kind of like a normal arc, and it finished on a low because it almost felt like I'd been beaten by, my mental health or my body. And I did a couple of them, and I remember, going home for a Christmas, or I think it was an Easter, and just speaking to my parents and saying, my story just isn't finished. I can't very well talk to these kids and say, look, I had all these amazing things, but then I was beaten by my own mental health or my own body. I need to do something to try and finish that story, to help them see that I went through such a massive low, and that I came out the other side. So then decided to kind of jump back in the swimming pool. My coach that had taken me to London had moved up to Newcastle, so I was in safe hands. She was looking after me, and I kind of entered my first international competition in December of 2018, my last year of uni, and I just gave everything to it. Albeit I wasn't training anywhere near as much as I was before London, but I was still in the water pretty much every day of the kind of working week. And I came away with a silver medal in the 50 meters freestyle, which, I didn't set the world on fire. It wasn't the greatest time I'd ever done. But to come away with a silver medal after going through all that stress from the last kind of 2 years post the Rio qualification period, I felt that was a really nice end to that arc and a really nice place where I could just kind of park my swimming career. And then it allowed me the time to focus in on the rest of my university journey, 6 months. And again, at that second year of uni, so 2017, 2018 academic year, I really, really struggled. So I spent that summer not only kind of training for this competition, but working on my educational skills. I think I was averaging like a third. I was getting 55% or something like that. So I really needed to pull the bag out in my last year to kind of get myself up to where I needed to be. And I came away with like 75% first class honours degree, and gave me the platform alongside my swimming career to, have a great trajectory into what I wanted to do in the sport industry. So, there's definitely an arc there. And again, it's kind of lessons I picked up along the way as I've gone through my sporting journey, my university career, now into my professional life, where I'm still using those lessons of high performance sport, picking up bits and bobs and skills along the way. And I'm still developing now. I'm, 2 years into my journey here at Formula One, and I'm still learning as if it was a school day. And I lean back on that support network who allowed me and gave me the tools and the opportunities to be where I am today. And I'm very grateful and very humble for that.
Sanofi aims to raise the bar for patients living with hemophilia. Reimagine what's possible by visiting rareblood-disorders.com to hear more about Sanofi's dedication to the bleeding disorders community. And thank you, Sanofi, for supporting the I'm Fine segment. Thank you, Jack and Luke, for your work on it. And thanks again to Jenna, Sophie, and Luke for coming on to discuss their beautiful film, which listeners at What We Wished Film on Instagram is where you can go to follow along. You can also find Jack and Luke and pretty much everybody else on Instagram. Amy's there. I'm there. Bloodstream Media. I don't know if you guys know this. Instagram is pretty popular. So if you go to Instagram, you can really keep up with a lot of things going on this episode of the Bloodstream podcast. Thanks as well to our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Visit bleedingdisorders.com for more on them, our advertising supporter, Pfizer, and our segment supporter, Genentech. 8 years in, the Bloodstream podcast would not be possible without the support from our industry partners, and we are grateful for that support. Okay, Bloodstream listeners, get this. At the time of our next episode, September 13th, somehow, some way, that's the day Amy and I and the greater Bloodstream and Believe Limited team will be in Atlanta, Georgia for the Bleeding Disorders Conference. I can't believe we're already at that point in the calendar, but we are. So definitely make sure that you're following us on the gram to see updates and moments from our experience at the conference. And once again, subscribe to the Bloodstream podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, to receive the next episode of Bloodstream the moment it goes live. Our email address is mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. Feel free to reach out to us there with topic suggestions or casting inquiries. We're always up to something. And with that, that is all for this episode. I'm your host, Patrick James Lynch, and on behalf of my cohort, Amy Bradford, take self-care of yourself. Bye, everybody.